It was a chaotic day at the police station, with the officers busy investigating a murder and handling calls for various emergencies from all over the city. One such call came from a little girl named Magi, who reported that her mother was not waking up. The dispatcher on the other end of the line tried to get more information from Magi, but the little girl did not know her current location. She could only provide visual clues like big gray houses, a barking dog, trees, and a broken gate. Officer Nancy, along with her team, was assigned to the case and set out in search of Magi. They arrived at the address that the girl had given, but it turned out to be an abandoned house. Nancy then spoke with the neighbors and learned that Magi and her mother had moved to a poor area about 12 miles away after the death of Magi's father in an accident. As the sun began to set, Nancy and her team arrived at the impoverished area, which was without electricity. While walking, they heard the sound of a barking dog, just as Magi had described. They followed the sound and arrived at a small rundown house. Nancy saw a silhouette of someone in the window and realized it was Magi. The girl was crying and waving for help. As they approached the house, a stray dog charged toward them. Nancy picked up a pebble and threw it at the dog, scaring it away. She then kicked the door open and entered the house, not knowing what she might find inside. Inside, Nancy found Magi crying and distraught. The little girl ran to her, seeking comfort. Nancy tried to calm her down and asked her what had happened to her mother. Magi led Nancy to a room where her mother lay lifeless on the bed. It was evident that she had been dead for some time. Nancy's team secured the scene and called for backup. They tried to comfort Magi as they waited for the ambulance and detectives to arrive. The officers were horrified by what they had found and wondered how long the little girl had been alone with her deceased mother. As they waited for the ambulance, Nancy sat with Magi, holding her close and telling her that everything would be okay. The officer could not shake off the feeling that they had arrived too late, but she was determined to make sure that Magi was safe and taken care of. Magi sat in the back seat of Nancy's car, her stomach grumbling with hunger. "I'm hungry. Mommy is not waking up all day. She's sleeping," she repeated over and over again. Nancy could feel her heart breaking at the little girl's words. She knew something was wrong. She carried Magi outside and placed her in the car. "Please give her some biscuits." "I'll be right back," she instructed her team before heading back inside to look for Magi's mother. She searched the entire house but found nothing. Just as she was about to give up, she noticed a door leading to the basement. Nancy hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open and descending the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, she found Magi's mother lying unconscious on the floor. Nancy rushed over and tried to wake her up, but to no avail. Panic set in as she realized that the woman was already dead. She immediately called for backup, and within moments, medics and social services arrived at the scene. As the ambulance carried Magi's mother's body away, Nancy was left wondering how to break the news to the little girl. "How will I tell her that her mother is dead?" she wondered. But before she could figure out a way to do it, Magi ran after the ambulance. Nancy quickly grabbed her and held her tight, trying to console her. "Sweetie, Mommy will be fine. Be a good girl and listen to what I say," she said, her heart breaking at the thought of what was to come. But as social services arrived and informed Nancy that Magi would be sent to a foster home, she knew she couldn't let that happen. Despite the risks, she took Magi home with her that night, hoping to give her a warm meal and a safe place to sleep. Later that night, as Nancy and her husband Jacob sat in their living room, Nancy recounted everything that had happened to him. "We are yet to find out how she died," she said, her voice trembling. Jacob's heart sank at the news. "Does the girl know that?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "No, I don't know how to tell her. She still thinks her mother is fine in the hospital. Her heart will break when she comes to know the truth," Nancy replied. But as they sat in silence, a strange idea suddenly occurred to Nancy. "Darling, I was thinking, why don't we adopt Magi?" she suggested. "We have been trying for a baby for a really long time, but I haven't been able to conceive. Maybe this is meant to be." Jacob was taken aback by the suggestion but quickly warmed up to it. As they sat in the living room, Watching Magi sleep peacefully in the guest room, they knew that their lives were about to change forever. Nancy and Jacob had been trying to conceive a child for years. They had gone through all the methods, but nothing worked. Nancy had given up on the idea of becoming a mother and focused entirely on her career. She felt exhausted and constantly in low spirits, believing she could never have a child. One day, Nancy met Magi, a little girl who needed love and support. Nancy felt her heart begin to heal, even if it was just for a few hours. She suggested to Jacob that they adopt Magi, who was such a beautiful little miracle. Jacob reflected on Nancy's words and looked at Magi, who was fast asleep between them. He felt her innocence and presence fill the hollow in their lives and realized that this was the joy he had craved all his life. He agreed to the adoption, believing that a family was about love and affection, not genetics. Nancy took Magi to her mother's funeral a few days later, leaving her at the foster home and promising to come for her soon. Nancy was anxious about how Magi would react to seeing her mother's funeral. She led Magi to her mother's coffin, trying to distract her by talking about the butterflies, flowers, candles, and crosses. But Magi didn't know that her mother was inside the black box. Nancy struggled to explain to Magi that her mother had gone to live with God in heaven. A few months later, Nancy and Jacob adopted Magi and threw a lavish party to celebrate. Jacob raised a toast, feeling like the happiest man on earth, seeing his wife holding a little miracle, fast asleep in her arms. Nancy interrupted him and revealed that they were going to be a happy little family of 4, handing him an envelope with a positive pregnancy test. Jacob could not believe his eyes, and tears of joy gushed from his eyes. He raised a toast to their happy little family of 4, and Nancy's prayers were answered most beautifully at the right time. They had found joy and happiness, not through biology, but through love and affection, and they were grateful for it.